Hi, I'm Foxy Cellars, and today I'm going to be talking about Becoming Led Zeppelin. Just got back from seeing the movie. If you would, go ahead, click the like, click subscribe. You'll get keyed into more Foxy Cellar videos just like this one. I'm usually talking about movies or storytelling and sometimes music. This happens to marry the two together, so let's get started. Okay, so it's important that you understand if you're going to go see this movie, you need to like Led Zeppelin. If you do not like Led Zeppelin, this is not for you. If you are not that familiar with Led Zeppelin, you do need to have a great appreciation for the blues and a bit of the history of the blues to really get into this. So, with that, full disclosure, you're not going to like it. I happen to be a monster Led Zeppelin fan, so I was enthusiastic about seeing this in the theaters. If you're on the fence about like, oh, I'll just wait till it comes out and I can just stream it, and you happen to be a great Led Zeppelin fan or really love the blues, the theatrical experience is very important. I would recommend seeing this in the theater. They do amp up the volume pretty drastically, I'll tell you that. And I was lucky enough, I went and saw it in Redondo Beach, and they have the great Dolby Cinema Theater in there, and the sound was really great. They do really amp up the sound. So if you're one of those people that doesn't like going to concerts, this might not be for you. You might want to wait until it comes out, but there's a lot of little tidbits and some great information. You're not going to learn anything groundbreaking as far as information about the band. Everything you probably know, especially if you're a Led Zeppelin aficionado, you're not going to learn that much, but there's a lot of little stuff sprinkled in there. So let's get into it. So this documentary was directed by Bernard MacMahon, and it's the first time Led Zeppelin has participated in a documentary. It also has their full cooperation. So I think almost the first time you're going to hear Led Zeppelin music in a Led Zeppelin documentary. You'll hear more from some of them than you will hear from others. And that's just because, of course, John Bonham passed away, but there's some really great archival footage that includes John Bonham that no one's ever heard. The interesting thing is you see the reaction from some of the band members who are hearing this interview footage for the first time. So it's very sentimental for them, but interesting to see their reaction to it. Now, because this is completely sanctioned by Led Zeppelin and the three remaining members of Led Zeppelin, it has a feel that is a very great reflection of them. So it doesn't go into any of the controversies. It doesn't go into any type of rumors or things that they had done. It's strictly all in the up and up. If there's some sort of struggle that they go through, it's something they wanted the audience to see. But that's fine because we're familiar with a lot of the things that may have happened, whether it's groupies, whether it's drugs, whether it's, substance abuse issues, whether it's family turmoil, death, whatever. Like they don't cover that, but they'll touch on things that were like a struggle for them at the time when they were emerging as a band. And the really great thing about that, though, is when they speak and they speak about each other, and even like your what you see of them, it's really, these are four very beautiful people, and you feel that when they speak because of their involvement, of course, but like they're just portrayed in a way that is humble and beautiful and just very down to earth. And you're also, bear in mind, you're covering a time in their life when they're nobody, and B, they're discovering themselves, and they're so innocent and they're so youthful, and just the world is their oyster because they're just discovering things. So the things that they do touch on leading up to this are their influences. And, anytime anybody talks about things that influence them, things that like inspired them to do what they do, it's done in just, the palette is painted thoroughly. This leads me into the things that I didn't know about that were extremely interesting to me. I would have thought it was just, jam packed with Led Zeppelin music, but they literally like open with Whole Lot of Love playing in the background, really loud, boom, boom, boom. And then you never hear a Led Zeppelin song for like, I want to say 45 minutes or so. Like it's a good long time. They're covering their inspiration. So like, it's very Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones heavy at the beginning, because they're kind of the ones, I wouldn't say they're the ones that formed the band, but they're the ones that were like the beginning roots to it. Clearly, if you know Led Zeppelin, they have a huge blues influence. And all of us are familiar with the big names like the B.B. Kings and the John Lee Hookers and the Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and whatnot. And of course, Robert Johnson. However, they introduced me to some players that I had never heard of that were really of interest, especially Jimmy Page and his influence of Lonnie Donegan. I'd never heard Lonnie Donegan. He was really great. And he was more of almost like rock. He had a little bit of blues influence, but he was mostly like, rock and roll, Elvis Presley style type music that this is what Jimmy Page, when he heard this, he's like, that's what I want to do. And then, of course, Robert Plant, he was influenced by Sonny Boy Williamson and his harmonica. And that's where you start to see some of the harmonica that's in the Led Zeppelin songs and what it was rooted from. But early on, it covers, the life history of their families, specifically Jimmy and then John Paul in the beginning. And the interesting thing about John Paul was he came from a musical family that was part of like vaudeville. They were traveling around. So he was on stage as a young boy performing with all types of different instruments. And he definitely had a very rich background in all of the instruments that he needed. So early on, it does show where John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page were session musicians together. And they worked in studios helping different musicians do whatever it is they needed to do, whether it was for, television or it was for, big musical events. And they had to move from instrument to instrument and got kind of the hang of being able to do whatever it is that was needed at the time. One specifically that came up too was Shirley Bassey, who had done some arrangements for the 007 films, and they worked on that. And that's how they got to know each other. So it kind of does set up that. A lot of interesting stuff that happened, and then when they first formed, there's all these little tidbits that were interesting to see because, and I want to point this out too, because if you go into this and you love Led Zeppelin, you know Led Zeppelin through all the years, and you know all of the brilliant things that they were able to accomplish. But by not having any Led Zeppelin music at the beginning and having like all of their very, very young story told leading up, and it does kind of expose a little bit of what was going on in the world at that time, you're almost devoid of all memory of the Led Zeppelin that you know by the time they form and they're starting to do a couple of their initial gigs. And the way they paint the picture is that this wasn't supposed to be as great as, they expected to be great, but what the audience was seeing right away was something very, very unique. Some were open to it and some were not. And there's this really great scene, and I can't remember the venue. They say it in the movie. It might have been, and I think the first venue they ever played at was called Middle Earth, which, of course, if you know Robert Plant, he was heavily influenced by Tolkien and his stories, and his lyrical writing has a lot of Tolkien in it. But anyway, so like the first gig they played was Middle Earth. I think it's their first real gig that they had, and they have film footage that was never seen. They were playing Communication Breakdown, which is it's a pretty heavy song. So it might they might not have been ready for this type of music just yet. But it comes on, and like the parents are kind of like looking at their watches or looking around like, what are we listening to? And the kids have their ears covered. They're just like, this is heavy metal. This is crazy. They clearly weren't ready for it. And they had that problem in England with a lot of the gigs that they were doing there. And it wasn't until they came over to America that they exploded, because the American music culture was like, whoa, we loved it. And bear in mind, they were influenced by blues. So, the blues mostly came from the American South, and they resonated with it when it came there. And so they toured all of America first. I noticed too, like as the movie goes on too, they start to crank the sound louder and louder and louder. And it was pretty wild. As they go along too, there's a lot of very smart things they point out that they did. One being, everything that Peter Grant, their manager, helped them do as far as maneuvering. Brilliantly, they were not open to doing singles, which is what every band was doing. Like they were just coming out with singles. There weren't albums weren't as common then. They would pump out those 45 record disc singles. People would listen to those and they would become a big hit because they'd be played on the radio. What they did instead, this is like they wanted to make an album. They recorded an album and they recorded it on their own dime. And then they went around so that they could own the album. They went around and tried to sell it. And they toured first because they knew the record company that they wanted to get this to. So they kind of gave themselves some exposure, and then they presented it to Atlantic after had already done a little bit of touring in the US. And they signed a very, very smart contract with Atlantic Records. So the footage, that they show throughout there, I think there's like 5 or 6 where these were shows that have never been seen before. So they were able to kind of get a hold of some footage that no one had seen. They put it in, and even the band members, like, because they have interviews with each of the band members throughout, and some of them have never seen any of this footage too. So it's really interesting for them to have the experience of watching it for the first time too. As it gets going, they start to pour out some of the really great Led Zeppelin shows. And the cool thing is like they show you their failures of trying to play in front of certain groups, especially like that Middle Earth gig that they had in the UK that didn't go well. And then they show you like, I think it was somewhere in San Francisco was their first big show that was in America, and boom, it just exploded. And from then on, the music mirrors their trajectory very well. As they're exploding, the music is getting bigger and bigger, and you can feel it. And the sound that in the theater that I thought was one of those Dolby cinemas was really great. I got the impression that Jimmy Page, maybe even John Paul Jones, was involved with the sound of this film and making it sound the way he wanted to. There were clearly some remastered audio that was used. I'm looking forward to it coming out on a streaming platform so that I can watch it again. But it was an experience, and you don't have that too often with a documentary. I can't remember the last time I went to go see a documentary in the theater, but this one was worth it, and it was definitely a cinematic experience. I want to thank you for watching. I hope that if you are a huge Led Zeppelin fan, you do go see this in the theater, but when it comes out streaming, you're going to love it either way. So if you would, click the like, click subscribe, add some comments if you've seen it or if you intend to see it. Love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.